Whispers of Ravenwood Manor. The mansion stood on a windswept cliff, overlooking a sea that mirrored the brooding sky above. Ravenwood Manor was an age-old relic, veiled in shadows that seemed to breathe and whisper among its corridors. It was on one such gloomy evening that London's most enigmatic detective, Elliot Langley, was summoned to unravel the enigma that had enveloped the manor. The incident that drew him was as shrouded in mystery as the house itself. Earlier that evening, as the tempest raged outside, a scream more chilling than the storm resonated through the grand halls. It was Mrs. Eliza Hawthorne, the widowed matron of the manor, whose falsetto wail had alerted the inhabitants of Ravenwood. Lying on the imported Persian rug, surrounded by an assortment of toppled shelves and scattered books, was the lifeless body of Charles Hawthorne, Eliza's brother-in-law. Detective Langley arrived under the veil of darkness, his silhouette cast long and flickering in the lantern light. At first glance, Charles appeared to have met with a common accident, a fall perhaps, but Langley knew better than to accept simplicity at face value. His sharp eyes noted the peculiar angle of the body, the odd mingling of shadows with the crimson pool that edged out from beneath Charles's torso. The library itself felt sullied by years of neglect, heavy with the musky scent of decayed paper and worn leather. He could almost hear the manor's past breathing heavily as he crossed the threshold. Gathering the mansion's residents, he keenly observed Lady Eliza, whose grief seemed overshadowed by something more elusive. Next was Dominic, the estate's caretaker, who stood aloof in the corner, maintaining a veneer of detachment, his hands betraying a slight tremor. Mrs. Agatha Pembleton, a distant cousin and frequent guest, appeared flustered, her eyes darting nervously. Finally, there was Amelia, Charles's only daughter, whose expression of disbelief was moderated by a strange underlying calm. The storm had driven all indoors, creating a captive stage for Langley's inquiries. "Miss Amelia," Langley began, his voice a velvet blend of authority and empathy, "was your father in the habit of visiting the library at such hours?" Amelia shook her head slowly, a shadow crossing her features as she responded, "Father seldom ventured from his study in the evenings." Her voice, though steady, was marred with an undertone of something she wouldn't let slip. "And yet," Langley continued, "tonight he did. I find that curious. Were there any disputes among you all, perhaps over the family estate, which might have prompted this unusual visit?" The room stirred slightly, breaths held collectively at bay. Dominic cleared his throat, breaking the silence under his coarse voice. There was a disagreement between Charles and Lady Eliza regarding the division of assets. "It's no secret." To this, Eliza snapped her head toward Dominic, her facade of grief momentarily giving way to a flash of anger before resuming its solemnity. "It wasn't the reason for him being here tonight," she insisted, her tone betraying a crack of uncertainty. Langley's rigorous mind processed the interaction, attuning itself to the subtleties, absorbing the dissonances resonating within the room. His eyes then fell on the bookcase from which so many volumes had tumbled. Amongst the disarray, a single book with darkened edges beckoned his attention. Removing it, he drew a sharp breath as a small, silver key clattered to the floor. A misplaced key, in this sea of books, he mused aloud, noting the reaction of Argus Pembleton, who flinched as the relic hit the floor. Langley had begun to piece together strands of a web that hinted at events far more sinister than a simple accident. As the night deepened with the storm broiling outside, he gathered the household once more in the drawing room, where the shadows danced restlessly against the flickering embers. "I believe I have found the threads that led to Mr. Hawthorne's demise," he announced, his voice layered with solemn gravity. "This silver key opens a hidden drawer in the desk within the unusually vacated study of Mr. Charles." His gaze turned to Mrs. Pembleton, whose face now resembled the pallor of paper. "Mrs. Pembleton, you seem knowledgeable about this particular drawer. Would you care to shed some light?" Panic seized Agatha's voice as she confessed, Charles discovered letters not meant for his eyes, letters that should have remained buried along with deeds unspoken and sins long past. "I feared what he might unveil could tarnish us all." Her eyes fell upon Amelia as if handing down a burden. Yet, Langley interrupted her spiral. It seems Amelia was clandestinely safeguarding her father's secrets amidst his unsolved military debts, simmering beneath the surface. Isn't that why he came to the library? To destroy the evidence of those letters on this stormy night, without detection from Lady Eliza? At this, Amelia broke down, confessing he would ruin us before he would ruin himself. I hid the key knowing he would search for it again. If father had indeed fallen out of reach, all would be lost in the chaos of our warring fortunes. And thus, Langley concluded, in his desperate attempt to purge these shadows, he met with an accident of his own making, slipping in his haste to flee the sins that no longer scripted a life solely confined to his conscience. The truth, an amalgamation of fear, protection, and a web woven too tightly, unraveled in Langley's revelations. The stormy evening at Ravenwood had claimed its dues, leaving silence and flickering shadows as Langley departed, leaving behind a manor whispering its new truths, bereft of its past echoes.